Hey everybody, what's up? I don't do this very often. I don't really. My channel's kind of fallen off in terms of what I was wanting to do with it at one point in time. But after the news, I woke up to this morning. I felt like I had to talk about this and do something. So for prosperity, this is the 28th of July, 2024. San Diego Comic Con has just happened, and what I really want to talk about is the big news coming out of the Marvel Studios Hall show, which really I should be really excited about. I think pretty much most comic book fans and what Marvel would want to happen is you to be excited before it. But I'm just not. For those of you who aren't aware or haven't seen it, Robert Downey Jr. has they have announced his return to the MCU as Doctor Doom, to appear in the upcoming two Avengers films. Avengers Kang Dynasty has now been renamed to Avengers Doomsday, and we still have Avengers Secret Wars, which I'll come to in a moment. They've also announced that the Russo brothers are coming back to direct both films, and my first reaction to hearing that RDJ was coming in as Doctor Doom was repulsion. I don't like the idea, in all honesty. In nearly any world, I really don't see the logic behind bringing him back, other than one big one, which I'll come to later on. There's a lot of reasons why I don't like it, but I feel like that to give a bit of context, I need to talk about a little bit about the state of the MCU and where it's kind of at. Realistically, the MCU is in a really bad place, driven almost exclusively by horrendous writing in some of their major movies, and pretty much across the board in all their TV shows, and also followed up by some of the creative decisions that they made really haven't been great. A lot of that is down to pretty much not knowing where to go after Endgame, and also being driven by the need of Disney Plus to constantly output content. So quality became less and less of a priority, and it was all about quantity and meeting targets and meeting deadlines. And that's been apparent very much, with a couple of outliers since Endgame. Realistically, that the state of the MCU is in the absolute toilet, and it's certainly from where it was in Phase Three of Marvel, going into Endgame and coming out of Endgame. They had two ways to go. They could either capitalize on the popularity and really continue that momentum, or they could let it drift. They let it drift, and then they let it sink, basically. Um, they've been completely scatterbrained and not been able to really get a direction going. And I feel like that's based on a lot of the creative decisions that they made, which I mean they've been made compounded by the really poor writing that they've followed a lot of the creative process across the board. The recently released Deadpool and Wolverine film, which, just give my very brief 2 cents, I really enjoyed it for the most part. It's not particularly the actual story isn't particularly in depth, but it's very much character driven and character focused, so I can't really complain too much. It does quite well by a lot of the main two. It brings in some. I won't spoil anything, but it brings in some people, and it's really cameo, and it feels very key jangly, like, which has been one of the big problems with a lot of the MCU stuff and a lot of Disney stuff in general. But at least it was enjoy it. It was enjoyable. It was solid. It was pretty good. I need to watch it again to see if there's any massive plot holes and massive writing problems. But realistically, in a word, it was fine. But that doesn't save the MCU. The MCU is still in an absolute horrendous place because of everything else that they've been doing. And I just hope that this year of realistically they're having a year off in the most cases, certainly from the major movies, that may hopefully the new Captain America film will move in a better direction. But the way it's been going, I don't have any faith in that. The writing across the board, not just everything from Disney, certainly from Marvel and Star Wars, has been absolutely awful, and that's been their biggest problem. Until they fix that, it doesn't really matter what they do. The writing has to be good. So back to just that's really where we are with the MCU. So back to Robert Downey Jr. For me, the biggest thing is it reeks of desperation and creative bankruptcy. You can kind of say the same about the Russos coming back, but the Russos coming back I have less of a problem with because of, as I was saying, the state of the MCU and some of the hacks that have been writing and in charge of the creative processes recently. I'd rather the Russos came back and be creatively bankrupt than let them do it, because at least I know that they're competent compared to some of the other people. So I'll take that. RDJ coming in, however, is a completely different story. For me, it says they have no faith in their ability to create a new big villain, a new big character that's going to drive the MCU and drive the heroes, create an antagonist that is engaging. So what they're going to do is they're going to throw their the biggest star that the MCU's had since its creation and hope that sticks. Hang it on RDJ, take a boatload of money and back it up to his house and ask him to almost come in and save it. And the fact, obviously, that this was never the plan, because the original film was going to be Kang Dynasty and not Doomsday, is really a massive indicator to me that they thought, we need to make sure that these movies succeed. How do we do that? Robert Downey Jr. It has nothing to do with telling the right story. It has nothing to do with getting the right version of the character. It has everything to do with money. I think that there's no way to say this, but it will affect RDJ's legacy as Iron Man. Not as a, he's now a villain, so he was a hero sort of thing. He had this really great send-off in Endgame, and I've got problems with Endgame, but him as a character had that great send-off and that great capstone to that character and to that era of, I was going to say Marvel and MCU, but almost for movies in general. It was that big. And to be in this position now, that he's going to come back, regardless of how good his performance is, how good the movies are, I can't see them in any way. There's nothing to tell me that it'll be better than what he was, than his time as Iron Man. So the best we can hope for is on par. Most likely they can look at it's going to be worse. So are we going to look at it at the end and say, oh my God, what a great performance that was by RDJ, it was as good as his Iron Man? Or are we going to look at it as he came back, he phoned it in, and it just wasn't, his heart wasn't in it? Either way, I think it's a risk that obviously he thinks he can take at this stage of his career because he'll be paid millions upon millions. He doesn't care, but as fans of the characters, I don't think it necessarily does either of them justice. It also raises questions on what is the character. So, is it a Tony Stark variant that becomes Doctor Doom rather than Iron Man? Or is it a Doctor Doom variant that just looks like Iron Man? Either way, I've got issues with both of them. The former, as in it's a Stark variant that becomes Doctor Doom, you're going to have to do a huge amount of backstory because you've got to turn Iron Man. He basically has to not have the character moments that he has in the first Iron Man story, and then goes on to become what is essentially a dictator, war profiteer, and wants to take over the world, because that's kind of what Doctor Doom is. And in doing so, if it's a Tony Stark and it's Doctor Doom and it's not Doctor Doom, that then creates a question of, are we ever going to get an actual really good Victor Von Doom in the MCU or any Marvel property, really, at this point? Are we going to get Victor Von Doom? from Latveria. Are we going to get that? Because if it's a Stark variant, then that's not what we're going to get. If it's a Doom variant that just looks like Stark, then that raises massive questions in terms of this is purely creatively bankrupt, and it's almost laziness on the casting in the casting area, because the question becomes, is RDJ actually good casting for Victor Von Doom? I think he's got. I think Robert Downey Jr. has enough range, certainly, to be able to create something and do something interesting with that character, and try something and create a version of Doctor Doom. However, if he's playing if that's the case, it's like, why are you just going back to the well? Why can't you find an actor? There's plenty out there that could be good as Doctor Doom. Realistically, if he's just playing Doctor Doom but with it's his face, then that's just pure laziness and purely creatively bankrupt. If it was the former, as I mentioned, then it's not. Then it's like, I don't want that. I don't want the only Doctor Doom us to get in the MCU to be a variant of Tony Stark. I think that sounds awful in terms of a Doctor Doom who is essentially probably one of, if not the biggest villains that Marvel has. He is essentially up there with anybody else that Marvel has, and competes with basically anybody in terms of complexity of character, in terms of what you could do with it. It's like, he's a great character, and for us to only get a Stark variant of that, to me, is awful. That's just absolutely a horrendous decision to go down. And another option, so it's either a horrendous creative decision or a creatively bankrupt decision. If it's a Stark variant, it's a awful creative decision. If it's a Doom variant with Stark's face, it's a creatively bankrupt decision. Either way, it's not good. And then it comes to, as a comic book fan, as someone who loves these characters, I'm like, are we not going to get a proper Doctor Doom go up against and live in the world of the Fantastic Four? We've obviously got this Fantastic Four movie coming, and are we actually going to get them go up against a real Doctor Doom? Are we never going to get that? Or do we have to wait till after Secret Wars? You've also got this idea of they're bringing in Doctor Doom, and is this rushing the character? Because I didn't think they were going to do Doctor Doom as the main bad guy in the first Fantastic Four film, and now that they've announced RDJ and they didn't announce he was in that, I can't see that happening either. So we're going to get a cameo, I'm guessing, of RDJ at the end of Fantastic Four, and then his first appearance is going to be in Avengers Doomsday, followed up by Secret Wars. It's like, that impact on doing that creative decision has a massive impact, not only on the Doom character, but on the Fantastic Four as well, because he is so intrinsically connected to the Fantastic Four, as you're doing a disservice to those characters by making these decisions, not just on the Doom character. This isn't Kang. I like Kang. I like Kang as a concept. As a character, he's fairly underwhelming and doesn't really have that many great stories from the comic books. But this isn't Kang, where Kang's got lots of variants and Kang's got lots of things, and you can just kind of throw it away. You can kind of throw him away like they seem to have done, because obviously the issues with Jonathan Majors. But because Doctor Doom is so connected to Fantastic Four, really, to do Doom justice, you could have done something like, you could have done a Fantastic Four one movie without Doom. You could have teased him at the end, then have a second Fantastic Four movie where Doom was the main antagonist, kind of. Maybe he was kind of a Darth Vader presence, almost do an Empire Strikes Back kind of take on the Fantastic Four sequel, and then that could lead into an Avengers, call it Doomsday kind of film, and then follow up with a third Fantastic Four film, which would be the climax between the FF and Doom. But they're not, and the reality is, I worry for the future of the Fantastic Four franchise and this iteration of the Fantastic Four that we haven't got yet, because of this creative decision of bringing RDJ, because RDJ isn't, I can't imagine, is going to be in it for the long haul in terms of after these Avengers films. And I think all of these issues all stem from one real pain point, is it's about money. Because of the way that they've created these Avengers films, every Avengers film now has to make billions of dollars. It has to be the biggest film on the planet. So in order to do that, they need to throw everything at it. They need to throw every cameo. They need to throw every big actor that they've got. They've got to. It becomes less about the story and more about how many people can we get in the cinema. And as soon as you make that choice, as soon as your creative decisions are warped by how much money you can make, that then has a massive impact on terms of how you write the story. Because if your story is, we want RDJ as Doctor Doom because that gives us the most brings us the most money, then it becomes, what we do with Doctor Doom after that? How do we get to the before that? We're going towards a place where Endgame was this thing that was this almost, although it was a big, quite a dark story, it was this climax and almost this joyful moment for all these characters. We're going to get to the place where we need Secret Wars and we need a reboot, because they've moved everything into this space that they can't keep going because they've used everything. They will have used every cameo. They will have jangled every key. They'll have used every dirty trick in the book to try and get people excited without actually doing the thing that actually really gets people excited, and that's creating good stories with good characters. And at the end of the day, that's all I really want. I feel that they made massive missteps after Endgame. The major one being not having a new Avengers film sooner, and also focusing on yet another Avengers film that's going to be end of the world, big climax, everybody throwing at it, when realistically they should have had a smaller scale Avengers film. What's a smaller scale Avengers film? They could have done something like Age of Ultron, which is almost its own, not self-contained standalone, but it fits as a standalone story where you introduce a villain, you tell a story with the villain, and then the movie ends and you spin off of there. But instead they need it to be, because of, capitalism, they need to have it be the biggest thing in the world, and that was a major mistake. They should have done the Masters of Evil. That's what they should have done. Is what I've been thinking. I've thought about for years now, especially after Endgame. They should have took the time. They should have used Disney Plus to do this. Build up this new roster of Avengers. They've got their own villains, and create this Avengers film that brings some of these new and older Avengers together and tells a really personal story about each of their individual villains battling against them in almost like a 6 or 8 on 8 like confrontation of good versus evil, and having each of these characters go through personal moments of tied to their counterparts and having to come together as this new team to succeed. And it would be a very at your home. There's almost like there's multiple versions of this in the comic books you could pull from, but no, it's all about the money. So we're going to take the biggest star, we're going to give him the biggest role that isn't Iron Man essentially that we can, and we're going to be as creatively bankrupt as possible. And it doesn't matter, because Secret Wars, we can reboot everything. That's how I feel like that they're looking at it, and I feel like that's a massive misstep. I hope I'm wrong. I really do. I hope that they've thought this out. I hope that they can do right by Doctor Doom, by Robert Downey Jr.'s legacy, by the Fantastic Four. But at this stage with the MCU, I'm much more hesitant to give them any benefit of the doubt than I am to get excited about things. But I feel like that bringing RDJ in as Doctor Doom has all the hallmarks of being an absolute shit show. That is going to spell almost disaster for the long term success of the MCU. These next Avengers films are make or break. I believe that if they mess up these Avengers films, the MCU's done. I don't think it survives. I think it goes to Secret Wars. It goes on hiatus, and I think it has to go. And I think Marvel has to go to like almost standalone films again for best part of a decade before it can recover. Because I honestly the way that they've been going, really this fills me with dread rather than excitement. And coming out of San Diego Comic Con with big announcements, if I'm more apprehensive than I am excited, that tells you everything you need to know. But I'd love to hear everybody's thoughts. I know that the internet's kind of split on this as well, but I'd love to hear what people think. Drop me anything in the comments and I will look to respond to them, and I will speak to everybody later. Have fun.